So, last week, just for fun, I decided I would make the same game in 3 different game engines, just to see how easy it was. I used Godot, I used GDevelop, and I used Unity, and I decided I'd make the simplest game I could possibly think of, which was Pong. In this next video, I'm just going to go over all that I learned, and give you my opinion on which ones I prefer and the reasons why. So this is GDevelop, a fairly simple game idea. So I've just got the paddles that move up and down, and they're 2 players, so that you've got the same screen and the ball that bounces up and down. When it hits the back of the screen, your score goes up, but when you bounce against the paddle, your score doesn't go up. The score is just displayed on the top here. So the GDevelop version of this game was really simple to set up. So you've got just the objects in here. What I found was a couple of cool things about being able to do this is that the behaviors for those objects are really simple. So without any coding at all, I managed to get top-down movement going just by adding in the behavior, and you can change the values here. So this is just like being able to take some control over it. And because it's such a simple game, it's got extra stuff in here like rotating and using default controls and stuff that can be set up by default with 0 code, which is a really simple thing to do. For the actual logic of the game, in GDevelop you'd use events and actions. So you see here that when a certain thing happens, so when there's a certain event, you, like for example in this case the Q key being pressed, then you do a certain thing, and because you've got behaviors on these objects, it's really simple to be able to make them. In this case we're simulating the controls. The other thing about the main game loop as well is that you can do an always condition as well. So if you leave this blank, then every single frame certain things happen, and it's just so simple to be able to do this. So the GDevelop by far is the easiest one. Getting your head around this events and actions is critical to learning GDevelop. There's so much built in straight out the box with GDevelop. It's super easy, and there's some really great tutorials that you can follow too. So next is the Godot game engine. This is exactly the same game, as you can see. So just quickly play this one so you can see. So it's the same game. We've got the same concept where the paddles move up and down, and if they hit the back of the screen, you can see that the score at the top here goes up. If it hits the back of the screen, it stays as it is if it doesn't. So again, it's a really simple game. So what I've learned about Godot. Now the Godot game engine has this hierarchy thing where everything is a child of something else. So this is probably poor extendability because these aren't separate scenes as they should be, as Godot would expect you to be. So the paddle could be a separate scene like Unity's prefab kind of setup. So this paddle here, you can see it's got the paddle on its own has a script on it that makes it do stuff, but it's also got the sprite, which is the visual element, and it's also got the collision shape as children. So it takes you a bit of time to get your head around how it works. It's not components as Unity might be, and it's not quite as simple as the objects that you get inside of GDevelop. So it does, however, offer you a little bit more flexibility. So there are all these components on here. So if you've done Unity before, you might be familiar with those, but you can't add more than one script, for example, on this, and you can't add more components individually to this. You just have to borrow them as kind of like scenes or prefabs, and so you have to have these things. The code itself is actually quite fun to write. There was 3 scripts that I had to write for this one. One for the ball that just literally controls the movement. One for the game manager itself, which is in charge of the score, and one for the paddle, which makes the paddle move up and down. How those communicate with each other. So it's rather than having, as GDevelop has, rather than having like a top level game, with this one you have to use quite a fairly complex system of signals, and even in the basic beginner tutorials you're expected to do signals, and this is the same thing as Unity events, which is something that Unity programmers don't tend to get to till much later down the line. So for example, that you can see that the ball has events. If you look on the right hand side here, there's this ball, when it hits the back, will fire an event called on ball player 1 scored, which is actually on the game script, and the game script is on top of the top level game, so it's able to communicate to that. I'll just quickly show you that one. So the ball has these signals, they're called, which is effectively multicast delegates as you would get in Unity, but they would be this player 1 scored signal is what's passed, is what's called when the paddle, when one of the paddles has an area entered, and then it'll call that signal when it needs to emit the signal. So when we see that this score has been made, the emit signal, then the name of the signal is emitted. So when the ball gets to one side of the screen, that's how it emits the signal. So it seems like a really good way of doing it, but it can be a little bit confusing. The other thing is finding objects inside the hierarchy isn't quite so easy, and looking through a lot of tutorials, it talks about having so calling down and signaling up, so sending signals from lower level objects to the top level object is how it wants you to follow as a design principle. But you can actually, so this game, for example, this game script is on the game, and it can easily find objects inside as we go down. One of the cool things that I did see is that you do get code completion within this. So even for things like, I wonder if we can do this again. So you can actually find some reasonably good code completion where it can do that. And the Python-like syntax is fairly familiar for people who have maybe come from Python. It's a shame that the words aren't exactly the same. It could easily have been more similar. Things like creating the var keyword before variables. It would have been nice if if it was trying to be like Python, if it was a bit more like Python. But one of the coolest things about it when you're coding is that it is a really limited instruction set, so there's not a lot to worry about. But the really cool thing about it is all of the built-in help. So if you see something and you're not sure what it does, you can easily just control click on it. So for example, this is action pressed. If you didn't know, you hold control and you click on it, and it brings up the documentation inside of the editor, so you never have to leave it. It's all in one, and it helps that it's something like 63 megabytes the entire download, and it comes as just a single exe. So that's all you really need to start getting up and running with 2D game development, and it even does 3D fairly well. There's online docs and there's search as well, so everything is all integrated within this, so you're able to find stuff very, very easily should you need help, and it does have very simple logic. This is highlighted quite strongly by the fact that when you go to the the Godot documentation, the actual language section is, it's only a few pages long, and it covers all of the language constructs and how it works, how it's trying to be like Python. You can see that there's a very limited number of actual keywords that you can use, so you don't have to get too complicated. It's not like you're learning the entire C# programming language in order just to get a game going. The fact that it's just a GD script, it's not another programming language, probably works for it in that it's not getting extended all the time and making things harder and harder to understand. So it is probably quite a fun language to learn, and with everything being in this in the Godot pages, you don't need to go too far out there, and the quality of the documentation for a lot of the stuff that's online, for example, if you did some Godot tutorials searches, you'd find that some of the best ones are GDevelop and Kids Can Code that you can see on YouTube, and they really are excellent. It's a great place to go for those simple and clear-cut and high-quality tutorials. And lastly is Unity. This one has been my game engine of choice for a very long time, so I was probably expecting to be slightly biased towards Unity. I do enjoy the fact that a single game object can have multiple different components added to it, and each of those components add to the functionality. And obviously you can as well have children objects, just like you would do, but they're not completely reliant on functionality, or the upper level isn't reliant on the functionality that exists within the lower level ones, as it would be in the Godot engine. The camera and coordinate systems in Unity is a little bit weird in that inside your scene you've got a grid, and you've got certain positions in that grid. When you if you look at the position, it's basically a 3D engine pretending to be 2D. There are Z coordinates as well, and the positions are kind of odd, based on like a world position rather than on pixel coordinates as you would get in Godot or inside of GDevelop. So these ones do make it a little bit harder to work out exactly where you are, but because you've got a visual editor in here, you can kind of work those things out and you don't need to calculate. Again, just like inside of Godot, they had to write a few scripts in order to get some functionality. So this game does exactly the same as the other ones do. Maybe for some reason couldn't be bothered changing the background, but it could be easily change the background to black instead of blue. It works exactly the same as all the other ones, and this required just exactly the same number of scripts as we had inside of the Godot engine. So for scripting, they're kind of like similar. However, all of the scripts that you see, the C# programming language is a lot more verbose. There's a lot more syntax to it. Everything has to be a class and inherits from owner behavior, and there's just a lot more to write. But the power of having that is that you get full code completion for absolutely everything, whereas Godot does have limitations in the code completion. You can spend your time looking things up in the documentation instead of just being able to kind of like look through all of these code completion entries to work out exactly what you need. The code completion is absolutely amazing inside of C#, which is probably why I still enjoy it. I very seldom need to write a variable name more than once. I'll write it once to declare it, and then I never have to write it again. The communication between all of the different game objects, again, you can work by referencing things so that your code becomes closely tied, or just like in Godot, you can use events as well, so that this is a very similar thing where it will basically signal the event just like it did inside the Godot engine. So there was a lot of similarities between Godot and Unity, and learning one would probably help with learning the other. You do see the similarities. The extra curly brackets and semicolons and stuff like that, you just get used to these things. They're not as bad. They're as bad as they seem, as long as, and you can learn C# outside of the Unity game engine without having to worry about all of the Unity API. The Unity API is, as I mentioned, the Unity API is pretty good. There's a lot of help as well, and if you're using Visual Studio, you can even look up API reference for any particular thing. Again, Control-Alt-M, Control-H, and that will take you to the documentation for the highlighted thing that you were looking at. And the documentation in general for Unity is really good, although as soon as you start getting into more complex stuff, the documentation can get a little bit difficult to understand. It's not always aimed at beginners, because this is used for AAA game studios as well as people learning to program and learning to make games. So it can seem, and some of the concepts are pretty difficult, but the Unity has some of the best learn resources out there. So learn.unity.com is absolutely amazing. You can pick courses and run through those courses. You can get full sections on specific things, and even get certification as a Unity developer through these things. So there's a ton of stuff in there that I've only just barely scratched. But yeah, Unity for making games is maybe not necessarily for beginners for certain things, but it is really powerful, and there's a reason why it's one of the top game engines in the world.
So thanks for watching. If you want to ask me my decisions, I really would find it quite difficult to make a decision. I really think that best for beginners is absolutely GDevelop. I love the events and actions. I love how easy it is to get something up and running, get a video game up and running. But as mentioned in my video, it does have its limitations. Best up and comer is definitely Godot. I love the fact that it's a tiny little install. It's a really great little programming language, nice and simple to learn, great syntax, and it's got a lot of potential. But undoubtedly the best overall, the whole package really is Unity. Out of the three that I tried, it really is great as a game engine, does a heap of things, and it's got loads of potential, and its track record speaks for itself. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.